Hi, Robin here at Gallant Farm. Before you go out and buy a pre-made pie crust for the next pie you want to make, try making one yourself. You might be surprised how easy it really is. It's not nearly as difficult as you might think. It's really just 4 ingredients. Just 2 cups of flour, a teaspoon of salt, about 1/3 of a cup of fat. You could add a little bit more even if you want. A nice cold fat that's been in the refrigerator, butter, shortening. Lard used to be a preferred fat for pie crust to make flaky pie crust. And then ice cold water. I sometimes even have ice cubes in the water to make sure it's nice and cold. That's how you get the flaky pie crust. You start with about 1/4 of a cup of water, but if you need more to get the dough doughy, just add a little more water. So you really just start with the 2 cups of flour, and you don't need to measure exact. I know a lot of bakers are pretty careful because they say baking is kind of an exact science, but pie crust doesn't seem to be. And about a teaspoon of salt. And just stir that up a little bit with a fork so it's together. And then add your shortening. And this is a pastry blender. Works really well for cutting in the shortening. If you don't have one of these, a fork works as well. It just takes a little bit longer. So you're going to keep adding or cutting in that shortening until the flour kind of resembles coarse cornmeal, and it's all like in little balls in there. When you get to that point, make a little well in the middle. You're going to add your ice cold water, 1/4 of a cup, and then a little bit more as needed until your dough holds together like dough. You're going to flour your hands a little bit so it's not as sticky. So I have one here that I already formed into a nice little patty for rolling out to show that process. Make sure you start with a floured board and a floured pin, floured rolling pin. You can use a bottle if you don't have a rolling pin, but almost all of us have maybe grandma's rolling pin. It takes a light touch. Start in the middle and go out toward the edges. Don't start on an edge. Kids usually want to just roll right up on it, but it doesn't work very well that way. The key is to keep turning it over in your flour so that it doesn't stick. Because if it sticks to the surface, you're going to just have a mess. But you just keep pushing it out toward the edges until you get the size required for the pie pan that you have. I'm not going to need to make this one real big because I have a pretty small pie pan. Once you think it's bigger than your pie pan, looks like it is, give it a little more flour just because I don't want it to stick. Fold it in quarters. Lay it right in your pie pan. Open it up and you're ready to do the edges. Then you can do the edges, you can do it the fancy way that Grandma used to do. Cut off any big excess. And if you didn't get it quite big enough, you can always use what you cut off on one side to even patch another side. It works out just fine. The way Grandma used to do it was 2 fingers, squeeze it, push it up with your other finger. It's one way to do it. You can also just use a fork, push the edges down that way. My mom had this fancy little tool that I think she probably got in a bag of flour maybe, and it makes a nice fancy edge. Also cuts a vent if you're making a 2 crust pie. That's just a fun little thing we have here. Thanks for watching.